The blazing sun was sinking behind Red Bluff, the last light of the day dyeing the giant cliffs blood red. The wind blew up from the valley, carrying with it a searing heat. At the foot of the cliff, the deep chasm swallowed all sound, leaving only the howling wind and the chilling echo of falling rocks. "May, Jonah, get away from the edge," Alina Hartfield shouted, her voice trembling with fear. The two children, their hair disheveled and their faces dirty, were bending over to pick something up from the edge of the cracked ground. They were only about 7 years old, so naive that they didn't realize that the ground beneath their feet was cracking inch by inch. Crack. A long, zigzag crack ran through the air. The ground beneath May's feet collapsed. She screamed, her small hands clutching at a protruding rock, her body dangling in midair. Jonah panicked and reached out to pull her, but he too slipped, half his body falling off the edge. The two of them hung in the air, just a few breaths away from death. The crowd of Silver Mesa townspeople stood a few dozen feet away. Some covered their mouths in fear, others shook their heads and whispered, "Don't mess with them. Half Comanche. That child shouldn't be in this town." No one stepped forward. Not a hand reached out. Elena bit her lip, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no time to consider. She threw off her boots, pulled her long skirt up, and ran straight for the edge of the cliff. Her knees and elbows bled as she scrambled over the jagged rocks. "Hold on, May, I'm coming." Her voice rang out, trembling but determined. At that moment, a tall figure emerged from the edge of the crowd. Rhett Blackhawk. His long black hair was tied back, his eyes were as dark as night. His mixed-race face had the fierce features of his Comanche father, but there was a hint of his white mother's calm. He threw a rope, the other end tightly around his waist. His voice echoed hoarsely. "Don't look down, Elena. Look at me." Elena glanced up. Rhett's eyes were locked on her, both commanding and trusting. Her heart was pounding, her hands were bleeding, but she didn't stop. She reached out, grabbed the slippery ledge, and wrapped her arms around May's small body. The girl was sobbing, clutching Elena's collar, shaking violently. "Pull!" Elena shouted back. Rhett held himself together, his muscles bulging, every inch of rope taut as if about to snap. The others just stood there watching, some backing away, whispering, "If they live, disaster will befall the town." A sudden gunshot rang out. The bullet grazed the cliff, sending up red dust. Elena was startled. Her heart stopped. Someone had deliberately stopped the rescue. Sheriff Cole's voice boomed. "Stop shooting! Whoever dares to shoot, I will lock them up." The crowd dispersed, silent. No one confessed. On the edge of the cliff, the situation became more suffocating. Jonah almost fell from her hands, his eyes wide open in panic. Elena tried to turn around, using her own body as a support. "Grab my hand, Jonah," she shouted. The boy trembled and reached out. In the moment of life and death, Rhett tensed and pulled hard. Elena used all her remaining strength to push Jonah up. The boy's small shoes had just touched the edge of the ground when the ground under Elena's feet collapsed. Elena and May fell down a few more feet. The whole crowd screamed in panic. Rhett immediately knelt down, half his body thrown out, the rope pinned to his waist. He held the rope with one hand, the other hand reached down. "Give her to me, Elena. Trust me." Breathing heavily, sweat dripping from her forehead, Elena looked up. Rhett's eyes were not only determined as a warrior, but also urgent, ready to exchange life. She gathered all her strength, lifted May, and handed her to him. Rhett pulled her to safety. May's cry echoed, tearing the deadly atmosphere, but Elena was still hanging. Her fingers were numb, blood seeping from her palms. Strength seemed to have left her body. "Let go of my hand, save yourself," she screamed in despair. Rhett roared, "Shut up, I won't let you fall." He threw the rope around Elena's wrist, tightening it. Teeth grinding, body cracking, Rhett pulled. Sheriff Cole and a few men finally rushed to help. Inch by inch, Elena was pulled up. When her hand touched the ground, Rhett bent over, hugging her tightly, their breaths mingling. The surrounding crowd was silent. No one applauded, no one cheered. They just watched, their eyes filled with judgment and fear. One woman whispered, "She saved those children. The town will pay." Elena, still lying on the ground, gasping for air, heard it all. But in Rhett's tight embrace, she knew she had crossed a line, not only saving May and Jonah's lives, but also binding herself to the fate of this unacceptable family. And in that moment, the flames of a long battle within Silver Mesa were ignited. The malicious whispers echoed in Elena's head even as she sat alone in the small room above the pharmacy. Her bandaged hands trembled on her knees, where the lacerations still stung. Below, May and Jonah were fast asleep, their breathing even. But every time Elena closed her eyes, she could still see their frightened eyes as they hung over the cliff. Part of her wanted to believe that the rescue was over, but the judgmental looks from the people of Silver Mesa that day said otherwise. This town would never forget and never forgive. Elena Hartfield was no stranger to loneliness. 3 years earlier, her husband, Dr. Jonathan Hartfield, had died in a bandit ambush while on his way to a farm outside town. His death had left Elena with a huge void and the old pharmacy. It was rumored that Elena was different. She prescribed not only potions imported from the East, but also sage leaves, echinacea root, and herbal oils she learned from an old Apache teacher. Some people came to her in despair, then whispered behind their backs that woman uses witchcraft. But Elena knew, if you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will. She ignored the world's gossip, quietly opening her shop every day, helping those who dared to come. And it was that stubbornness that urged her to rush out to save May and Jonah today, because she understood the feeling of being abandoned by the cold eyes of the world. At the same time, in the storage room below the pharmacy, Rhett Blackhawk sat silently, his fingers running along the rope that still had Elena's blood on it. He spoke little. His dark eyes seemed to contain the darkness of two worlds that he did not fully belong to. His father was a Comanche warrior. His mother was the daughter of a white pastor who had been captured in a raid. But instead of being resentful, she chose to stay, accept life among the tribe, and give birth to Rhett. Later, she brought him back to the white community to learn to read and write, then died early of a fever. Rhett drifted from there, working as a hired hand, herding horses, sometimes guiding caravans through dangerous areas. The white people called him a barbarian. The Comanches called him a halfway man. He belonged nowhere, except where he wanted to be, with May and Jonah. They were the two children of his sister, who had died in childbirth. Rhett swore with his life that he would never let them experience the loneliness he had. That night, when Elena walked into the kitchen, the yellow light of the oil lamp fell on Rhett's tall figure. He was splitting small logs to light the fire for the children. Rhett looked up at the sound of her footsteps. "You shouldn't have done that today." His voice was hoarse, both reproachful and grateful. "If I hadn't, you two would have fallen off the cliff," Elena replied, her eyes shining defiantly. He was silent for a moment, then asked, "Why help us, when the whole town wants to abandon us?" Elena smiled sadly. "Because I was there. I was looked down upon, labeled as different. I couldn't ignore the two children being looked at." Rhett leaned his hands on the table, leaning towards her. The distance between them was only a breath. Elena could smell the scent of fire and leather from his body, mixed with the familiar scent of herbs in the kitchen. She was momentarily confused, but his determined gaze forced her to stay. "Can you give us shelter for a few days?" Rhett asked, his voice low but filled with a rare plea. "I'll pay you, chopping wood, fixing the roof, anything." Elena nodded without thinking. "The upstairs room has been empty for a long time. Stay there. I don't need to pay, but I have one condition." "Condition?" Rhett raised an eyebrow. "Don't leave quietly. The children need a stable home, even for a few days. Make them feel safe." His eyes softened. In that moment, the coldness that surrounded Rhett melted away, revealing a man who wanted to protect but was too used to being rejected. The next morning, Sheriff Cole came to the pharmacy, his face tense. He took Elena aside. "Elena, you know the situation. The town council is angry. But I have a way, if Rhett will help me track the Barrows. They're lurking somewhere on the outskirts, preparing to raid. I need someone who knows Comanche tracks." Elena was silent. It was a double-edged sword. Rhett helped. He would have a chance to prove himself. But if he fails, the whole town will automatically assume he is an accomplice to the gang. He's lost so much, Elena said softly, but her eyes flashed. She knew this might be the only way to change Rhett's fate, and May's and Jonah's. When Rhett returned from a day of repairing the awning at the pharmacy that night, Elena told him about the sheriff's proposal. He was silent for a long time. Then he put his hand on her shoulder, calloused but warm. "Do you trust me, Elena?" She looked straight into those dark eyes, and for the first time, instead of darkness, she saw a fragile but persistent light. She nodded. "Then," Rhett said softly, his voice firm, "I will." The next morning, as church bells echoed across Silver Mesa, Elena stepped down to open the door of the drugstore. The atmosphere was different, quiet, tense. Usually at dawn, people would stop by to buy herbs or medicine for their livestock. But today, the wooden door creaked open, only to find a few cold eyes staring at her from across the street. A woman whispered to a friend, "She's harboring half-bloods right above her head. It's a disgrace to the town." Elena held her head high, pretending not to hear. But inside, the knife of her words cut deep. She thought only of May and Jonah, sitting upstairs trying to learn the letters she taught. The children deserved a chance, even if the whole town turned its back on them. Meanwhile, Rhett set out to find work. He brought with him strong hands and skills few could match, reading tracks in the dirt, taming unruly horses, building a shed with a few swings of an axe. But every door seemed to be shut in his face. At Baldwin's stables, the ranch manager just looked at him and shook his head. "We don't need more people." But just then, a young horse went mad, throwing the assistant to the ground. Without thinking, Rhett jumped into the fence, using a long whistle and a firm movement to force the horse back. In a few minutes, the animal was quiet, breathing heavily, but its eyes were soft. The people around were gaping. The ranch manager swallowed hard, but still said firmly, "The talent is there. But this town doesn't need more trouble." Rhett clenched his fists, then walked away, his back straight in the hot sun. He was used to rejection, but this time, the anger that had built up made him want to scream. Rumors spread faster than the wind. People began to say that Rhett himself had fired the shot at Red Bluff to set the scene, then pretended to be a hero. Some whispered that Rhett and the Barrows were related by blood. While Elena was shopping, a small stone flew into her basket. A man's voice growled, "You stupid widow, you'll drag the whole town down." Elena stood there, her eyes shining like knives. She didn't answer, just picked up the stone, put it back on the vegetable table, and turned away. But inside, a fire of anger burned. Despite her outward resolve, Elena was restless at night. She remembered the gunshots when she saved May and Jonah. Who pulled the trigger? Was it really someone in town who wanted to kill the children? Or was it an outsider who was watching? And why did Sheriff Cole hesitate for a moment, as if he knew more than he was saying? Sometimes for a moment, Elena looked at Rhett and wondered, what could he be hiding? A man who had grown up between two worlds, who had wandered, who had traveled with caravans and mercenaries. He had seen too much, done too much that she didn't know. She hated herself for that doubt. But the heart, after so much loss, does not easily give all its trust. One night, Rhett came home late, his shirt dark with sweat, his hands streaked with red dust. Elena was sitting on the steps, the oil lamp flickering. "Where have you been all day?" Her voice was soft but firm. "Tracking the valley. The sheriff wants me to find out where the Barrows are." "Are you sure that's all?" Rhett paused. There was pain in his eyes, but also restraint. He moved closer, bending down until their faces were only a breath apart. "Elena, I know what they say, but I swear on my life I will never stand with the bandits." The closeness made Elena tremble. She smelled horse smoke and sweat mixed with the scent of herbs on her hands. For a moment, she wanted to believe, wanted to let go of all doubt. And then, before reason could stop her, Rhett pressed his lips to her forehead. A brief kiss, but heavy with commitment. "Even if the world turns its back on you, I will stand by you," he whispered. The next day, Sheriff Cole came to see her. He pulled Rhett behind the stables and said in a low voice, "I see the tracks. The barrows are closing in." But, he hesitated, "some of the shell casings I found are the same as the guns the mayor's bodyguards used." Rhett frowned. "You mean?" "I'm not sure. But if the truth comes out, someone in town will go crazy." At that moment, Elena heard a few broken words from afar. A fear rose in her. Someone in the government wanted to blame Rhett. If so, she and the children would be dragged down with them. Elena went back into the house, her heart pounding. She knew the challenge was much bigger than whispers and hateful looks. This town was hiding a dirty secret, and in that power game, Rhett and she were just pawns. In that moment, Elena wondered, would she have the courage to go with him to the end, when her newly born trust had to face doubt? That night, the rain fell on the tin roof of the pharmacy, each drop like a steady drumbeat in the silence of Silver Mesa. Outside, oil lamps sporadically shone from a few windows, while most of the houses were dark and reserved. People whispered about the gangs, about the mixed blood in the town, and about the widow who dared to defy public opinion. In the small kitchen, Elena knelt by the charcoal stove. She carefully crushed dried mint leaves, mixed them with turpentine to make a balm. Rhett's arm was deeply scratched while climbing over the cliff to find traces of the barrows. The blood had dried into dark streaks on his tough skin. "Sit still," Elena signaled, her voice stern but trembling slightly. Rhett sat down on the wooden chair, his tall figure filling the small space. He rarely let others touch him, but this time his eyes softened, quietly observing her every move. As the cool medicine seeped into the wound, Rhett shivered slightly. Elena leaned closer, her slender shoulders brushing against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, slow, heavy, but steady like him. "Aren't you ever afraid?" Elena blurted out. Rhett curled his lips slightly. "Afraid? I just hide it well." "Hide it for what?" "Because if I fall, the children will have no one." Elena paused, looking straight into those dark eyes. In the darkness, she saw a fragile crack in his hard shell. A man with too much responsibility and pain. She gently placed her hand on the back of his hand. "You don't have to bear it all alone." The silence stretched on that moment, only the sound of rain tapping on the roof. Rhett didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he turned his hand, took hers, his calloused hand covering her slender fingers. Late at night, when the children were fast asleep, Elena stepped out onto the porch. The rain had subsided, leaving only the smell of damp earth in the air. Rhett followed, wrapping her in a coarse woolen blanket. "You'll get sick." His voice was low and husky. Elena laughed softly. "I have a pharmacy. I can cure myself." He stood close by, the warmth of his body spreading to her, making her feel uneasy. The night wind was cold, but the distance between them was growing hotter. Elena looked up, meeting his eyes. Eyes that had once been fierce on the cliffs, now soft and passionate. Rhett leaned down slowly, as if to give her a chance to look away. But Elena didn't shy away. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then deeper, burning as all the restraints that had been held back for so long burst forth. It wasn't the kiss of a casual lover, but of two souls finding shelter after a storm. When they parted, Elena whispered softly, her breath still trembling, "I don't know if this is a mistake." Rhett pressed his forehead against hers. "If loving someone in this hateful world is wrong, then I'm willing to be wrong until the end." In the days that followed, surrounded by suspicion and resentment, Elena and Rhett found small moments to be close to each other. In the morning, when Elena was busy at the pharmacy, Rhett helped take care of May and Jonah, teaching them to tie saddles, carving wood into toys. The sight softened Elena's heart. A man with a bloodline that was discriminated against could be so patient and gentle. In the evening, they prepared meals together. Elena kneaded bread, Rhett lit the fire. Once, when she reached up to a high shelf to get a salt shaker, Rhett stood close behind, one hand holding her waist so she wouldn't fall. At that moment, Elena blushed but didn't back away. At night, when the town fell asleep, they sat by the fireplace. Elena read a few pages of a medical book to Rhett, her voice soft and lulling. He listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes touching her hair as if to remember this rare moment of peace. But that peace was fragile. Every time she stepped out into the street, Elena still felt the eyes watching her. The anonymous letter appeared at the door. Leave Silver Mesa before it's too late. One night, after putting the children to bed, Elena looked out the window and saw a shadow lurking around the corner. The shadow disappeared immediately, but the uneasiness remained in her heart. She returned to the living room, where Rhett was sharpening a knife by the fire. He looked up, meeting her worried eyes. "What's wrong?" "It's just, I'm scared," Elena confessed softly. Rhett put the knife down, walked over, and hugged her tightly. "Let me take the fear. Just trust me." Elena pressed her face against his chest, listening to his strong heartbeat. In his arms her worries eased, but she also knew that these peaceful days would not last long. A storm is approaching, and their budding love will face its cruelest test yet. Dawn came with bad news. A man ran through Silver Mesa Square shouting that the North Granary had been robbed in the night. Grain sacks had been burned, and several guards had been severely beaten. A piece of leather with Comanche markings had been found on the ground, covered in horse tracks and ashes. It didn't take much, but that was enough to ignite the flames of suspicion. That mongrel," someone shouted. "Rhett Blackhawk is the guide for the Barrows." The news spread like wildfire. When Elena opened the door to the store, a large stone slammed into the wooden door. An anonymous note was taped there. "Go with a traitor, and you will die like him." That afternoon, Sheriff Cole knocked on the door of the drugstore. His face was tense, his eyes averted. "Elena, I must take Rhett to the station for questioning." "Interrogation?" Elena was stunned. "He was here all night, I can testify. But many people claim to have seen a figure that resembled him near the barn." Sheriff sighed. "I didn't want to do this, but the council forced me to." Elena bit her lip, her eyes blurred with anger. She turned to Rhett, who stood silently in the corner of the room, his face as cold as stone. "No need to defend yourself," he said softly. "They've been waiting for this opportunity for a long time." Elena stepped forward and grabbed his hand. "You're not alone, I'll tell the truth." Rhett looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. But at that moment, the door opened and several men rushed in, dragging him away. On the street, the townspeople gathered in large numbers, throwing trash and shouting, "Traitor! Get them out of here before disaster strikes." Elena rushed after him, screaming hoarsely, "He's innocent, you have no evidence." But her voice was drowned out by the screams of hatred. That night, in the small cell, Rhett sat slumped, his hands shackled. Sheriff Cole leaned in, his voice low. "We found some shell casings in the barn, the same type of gun as Mayor Avery's bodyguard. So the government is involved." Rhett curled his lips bitterly. Sheriff looked around and whispered, "I believe you, Rhett, but they don't want the truth. They want a scapegoat." Elena arrived holding a basket of food. When their eyes met through the bars, her heart ached. She pressed his hand through the crack in the door. "I'll find out who's behind it, I swear." Rhett shook his head. "Don't be reckless. If anything happens to you." "Don't say any more," Elena interrupted, her eyes red. "I won't leave you." But the tragedy didn't end there. The next morning, May and Jonah disappeared from the guardroom. On the table was a scrawled note, "If you want the children to live, confess." Elena screamed and searched everywhere. When she held the note in her hand, she trembled. "They've taken the children." Sheriff Cole heard the news, his face pale. "The Barrow Gang. They want to force Rhett to take the blame for them." This news made the townspeople even more angry. "The children are gone. He led the bandits to capture them. Kill him. Save the children." The flames of indignation turned into demands for execution. The town council held an emergency meeting, many calling for immediate hanging. In the meeting, Mayor Avery stood up, his voice resounding, "We must eliminate this threat. Rhett Blackhawk is a traitor, and the one who harbored him, Elena Hartfield, is also complicit." A murmur broke out. Some of Elena's friends who had bought drugs turned away, avoiding her eyes. The only woman who dared to speak up for him was now accused of betraying the town. Elena stood up, her hands clenched. You know he's innocent. So why do you want to blame him? Is it because you're afraid the truth about the barn will come out? Mayor Avery glanced at her, his smile cold. The truth, Miss Hartfield, is that we can't trust a half-breed, and those who support him bring nothing but danger here. That night, Elena returned to the shop heartbroken. She looked upstairs, where May and Jonah's bed was empty. In the darkness, all the memories came flooding back. The children's frightened eyes, the promise, I'll protect you, and now it was all taken away. Rhett was in jail. The townspeople had turned against him. The children were missing. Everything seemed to be falling apart. But as she sat down, her hand touched Rhett's forgotten notebook. Inside it were detailed notes of his tracks, the broken hoof, the path toward Dry Crow Canyon. Elena's heart burned with a small fire. If no one believes me, she whispered, I'll find out the truth myself. Night fell over Dry Crow Canyon, the wind howling through the crevices of the rocks, carrying the acrid smell of fire and smoke. Elena wrapped her cloak tightly, her hands shaking, but her eyes burning with determination. In the cloth bag at her side, she carried several bottles of herbal powder, something that would sting the eyes and cause coughing when thrown into the fire. Sheriff Cole stood beside her, his eyes tense. Are you sure you want to come with me, Elena? This is no joke. May and Jonah are my family, Elena replied firmly. If no one else dares to go, I will. Rhett was imprisoned, but Cole knew he was innocent. He quietly untied the chains before leaving, whispering, Now prove to everyone that you are not a traitor. When Rhett appeared, his silhouette tall in the moonlight, Elena choked. He put his hand on her shoulder, his eyes like smoldering fire. Let's go. We'll bring the children back. They followed the broken hoof prints Rhett had made in his notebook. Along the way, the wind whipped up red dust, making Elena cough, but she didn't falter. Nearing the canyon, a campfire flickered. The guffaws of the barrows echoed, mixed with the muffled cries of children. Elena gripped Rhett's hand. They're there. Rhett nodded, pulling a dagger from his belt. Sheriff Cole cocked his pistol, his eyes flashing with determination. The plan was simple: create chaos with herbal smoke, then rescue the children before the bandits could react. Elena threw the jar of herbal powder into the campfire. The white, acrid smoke rose, making the bandits cough. Rhett rushed in, knocking out 2 guards with a single powerful punch. Cole fired into the air, causing the rest to panic. Elena rushed to the tent where May and Jonah were tied. Elena! The 2 children cried. She knelt down and cut the rope with a small knife hidden in her skirt. Just then, a giant figure rushed forward, the barrow leader. He grabbed Elena's hair and pulled her back. You stupid woman! How dare you interfere with my business? Elena struggled, but he was too strong. Just as he raised his knife to strike him down, Rhett rushed forward and slammed it into his chest. The 2 wrestled fiercely, the knife glinting in the moonlight. In the chaos, another figure appeared. Mayor Avery. He was on horseback, followed by several of his men. His voice boomed. Hold them. Don't let anyone escape. Sheriff Cole turned around, his eyes furious. What are you doing here, Avery? Elena was stunned. She understood immediately. Avery was in league with the Barrow gang. He created robberies to sell grain and weapons to smugglers, and conveniently blamed Rhett. Rhett was cornered at the edge of the cliff, a knife to his neck. Avery sneered. A half-breed dies for me. The town will thank me for protecting them. Elena shouted, You coward! Do you still dare to acknowledge those children as your own grandchildren? The words were like a thunderbolt. The bandits were stunned. Even the sheriff was stunned. Avery turned pale, her voice faltered. You! What do you know? Elena stepped forward, her eyes shining. I know May and Jonah are the children of your sister-in-law, whom you once abandoned. You are afraid of the truth being revealed, afraid of losing your position as mayor, so you want them dead to bury the secret. The crowd fell silent. Rhett took advantage of the moment when the barrow leader was distracted, turned around and delivered a fatal punch. The knife fell, and he collapsed. Cole raised his gun, aiming straight at Avery. That's enough, Avery. You're under arrest. But Avery was not easily defeated. He pulled out his gun in an instant, pointing it straight at Elena. The gunshot rang out. Rhett rushed forward, blocking her. The bullet tore through his shoulder, blood spurting crimson. "Elena!" He fell to his knees, his eyes still determined. Elena screamed, hugging him tightly. But Sheriff Cole acted in time, shooting Avery in the arm, the gun flying to the ground. The remaining bandits fled in all directions, leaving the leader collapsed on the ground. The sky was dawn, the canyon was silent. May and Jonah held Elena tightly, their faces dirty but their eyes shining. Rhett, though his shirt was soaked with blood, smiled at the safety of the children. "You fool!" Elena whispered, tears falling down his cheeks. "If I could do it again," Rhett gasped, "I would still take the bullet for you." Cole put his hand on Elena's shoulder. "We'll bring him back, and the whole town will hear the truth." Elena looked up, her eyes red but determined. The tragedy wasn't over, but this confrontation had turned the tables. The next morning, a soft golden light poured down on Silver Mesa Square. People gathered in large numbers, this time not to accuse, but to hear the truth. Sheriff Cole stood in the middle, his voice loud. Mayor Avery colluded with the Barrow Gang, framing Rhett Blackhawk to hide his own sins and secrets. It was Rhett, along with Elena Hartfield, who risked their lives to save the two children and put an end to his plot. The crowd stirred. Many bowed their heads in shame. Those who had thrown stones and cursed now did not dare to look straight at Elena. As for Rhett, his shoulder bandaged, the wound still bleeding, stood straight in the middle of the square like a warrior. May and Jonah held hands, ran to hug him tightly. "Daddy, don't leave us again." For the first time in front of everyone, Rhett did not hide anymore. He bent down, holding the two children in his arms. Elena stood behind, her heart trembling. Not out of fear, but out of a simple happiness that was spreading. A few weeks later, Silver Mesa gradually recovered. Elena's pharmacy was no longer deserted. People, though still hesitant, began to come to her for treatment. They whispered apologies, brought baskets of apples, some flour, or just nodded confusedly. Rhett accepted the sheriff's offer to be the town's horse groom. The boys who had once sneered at him now learned from him how to tame unruly horses. In their eyes, quiet respect replaced old prejudice. Every night, in the upstairs room, Elena sat teaching May and Jonah to read each letter. Rhett sat next to her, sometimes adding words of encouragement, sometimes just watching silently. The once empty room was now filled with children's laughter. One night, after the children were asleep, Elena stepped out onto the porch. The moonlight cast silver on the tiled roof. The wind caressed her tangled red hair. Rhett followed, his arms around her from behind. "Elena," he whispered softly, "I've been to many places, but I've never felt like I belonged anywhere. Until I met you." Elena turned around, looking straight into those dark eyes. It was no longer dark, but the solidity of a home. "Me too," she whispered, the corners of her lips trembling slightly. "From the moment I held those children on the cliff, I knew we were a family." Rhett leaned down and kissed her. This time the kiss was not hasty, no longer uncertain, but full of peace, like a promise for tomorrow. The next morning, the four of them, Elena, Rhett, May, and Jonah, walked out of the pharmacy together. The townspeople stopped to look. But instead of whispers of criticism, this time there were nods, warm looks. Elena squeezed Rhett's hand. Beside them, May and Jonah chattered about their dream of planting a flower garden in the backyard. Rhett laughed, his eyes brighter than any sunrise. At last, after all the storms, they had found what had seemed so far away: a home, a family, and a place to call home. The story of Elena Hartfield and Rhett Blackhawk is not just a love story on the frontier, but a journey of courage and kindness in a world full of prejudice. Elena, a widow who was once despised, chose to reach out to save two children when the whole town turned its back. That action proves compassion is sometimes stronger than hundreds of prejudices. Rhett, a man of mixed blood, who was considered an outsider, eventually became a true hero because he knew how to live by honor, loyalty, and love. From a town that only knew contempt and fear, Silver Mesa changed. Not through eloquent speeches, but through a moment of daring to do the right thing, regardless of all eyes. The message left behind is clear. Courage does not mean not being afraid, but still acting when the heart is most trembling. Family is not measured by blood, but by the promise of protection and love that nurtures every day. And changing a community starts with one person standing up, and then one by one, others will follow. Elena saved Lily and Jonah, but in doing so, she also saved herself from the darkness of her past and found hope and a true home. That is the power of compassion, of love, and of daring to choose what is right over what is easy.